Manchuria, 30% of the population died as a result of starvation, deprivation, or the use of biological weapons by the Japanese colonizers. And even in India, in some of the most benign cases of colonization, the net result of famines resulting from the disproportionate application of free market principles resulted in the starvation, again, of tens of millions. We would say this is a crime for which colonizing powers, be it Japan, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Belgium, or Portugal, remain liable and should maintain a sense of responsibility for it. But it irks the people in these countries and it destroys the political narrative in the colonizing states when individuals stand up and either deny these harms and is a ban, a prohibition on individuals in these colonizing states advocating the position that colonization did more benefit to these countries than harm. We think that should be implemented using criminal sanctions. What I'm going to be doing in this speech is explaining first and foremost why and when do we ban something, why does this apply. Secondly, I want to talk about why the colonized countries deserve a monopoly over the narrative that they have so far been denied for centuries. And thirdly, I'm going to look at practical effects both in the colonized countries and also among the colonizers. But it serves us well to start with the basic principle point before we get into the maths desk, before we get into the crimes, of when, indeed, do we ban speech in the first place. Why has Germany, a free parliamentary democracy, banned advocacy of Nazi principles or positive discussion of its Nazi past? And the answer is, first and foremost, when that speech does more harm than good, that speech is no longer beneficial. The question of why speech is valuable is best reversed. Democracies so often allow free speech because we acknowledge it as a useful adjutant for developing good societies, good public policies, and facilitating peace among ourselves and our neighbours. The sort of speech we're talking about in this debate does none of the above. It fails on two particular regards. Firstly, it fails the factual check. We so often step in when speech is misleading, deceptive, or a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened. We would say to take this position honestly requires you to make a specific judgment. And that judgment is that the imposition of Western culture or your own culture or the infrastructure you provide these countries was worth the tremendous human cost and the deprivation of their political liberties. That requires taking the stance that political liberties and life are less important than your own cultural narrative and norm. We do not believe those positions can be functionally supported, particularly by the colonizing countries, and as a result the statement is in and of itself deceptive. Secondly, we think it is a harmful narrative in terms of what it conveys. It does two things in terms of the harm the narrative conveys. I'll expand on this a little bit more later. But in essence, one, it allows the colonizing power to issue responsibility or politicise responsibility for these crises and disjunct themselves from the consequences of their past actions in a way states are not supposed to do. States maintain liability for the actions of previous governments made under the name of that state. This allows the population to issue that responsibility. Germany never wanted that to happen, which is why they have owned the consequences of Nazism and those wars of oppression. We would like Japan to do the same. The second thing it does is it says to the colonized that even after all these years, their voices, their stories cannot be heard, and the crimes that were committed against them that still cause them to bleed today in the Middle East, where they face arbitrarily drawn borders over tribal boundaries that make no sense and prompt conflict, did not matter because it was all worth it in the end. So getting on from why we ban something, why this speech is actually harmful, we think that's now been proved. Why the colonised deserve particular control over this narrative, but first, opening.
Without arbitrarily drawing borders, would there be conflict in the Middle East and Africa?
Without arbitrarily drawn borders, would there be conflict in the Middle East and Africa? I would suggest probably so. There's probably going to be conflict everywhere in the world to some degree and extent. The question is, were those borders drawn in such a way that magnified those conflicts? Was the governments that led up to that magnifying the conflict? Would the same number of people be dead? Would the same number of people have been disenfranchised had those borders not been drawn in the way they were? And think in every situation, the creation of the artificial state of Manchukuo is a classic example, right? Drawing borders in the middle of nowhere and then running as a Japanese colony unambiguously caused more death than if it had been let be. So why do the colonised deserve a particular control over this? We think that psychologically and in terms of their own national culture and identity, the colonised was for so long denied any sort of voice over the narrative of colonisation. They were denied that voice during the process itself by the process of imperialism that denied them political representation and control. They continue to be denied it because overwhelmingly global academia is influenced by the narratives that have been developed out of westernised states and westernised academia. What that essentially means is that for so long the people who have been ill have been unable to tell their stories in a compelling way and have been unable to control that narrative. We think that if you have bled over an issue, if you have been been wronged, you deserve a greater control over the narrative than the person who wronged you. But it goes beyond that on a principle level, it goes into a practical level. The fact that countries like Japan continue to give politicians free leave to say that the colonisation of Korea, of Manchuria, of Taiwan, what then called Formosa, was a good thing, continues to be a source of rank hatred, of violence and disdain and instability within the Southeast Asian region. It is a block on positive relations between increasingly powerful and influential states that funds nationalism, that funds aggressive jingoistic expansionist policies, and is potentially the cause of flashpoints that affect the future prosperity, not only of these countries, but also, so far as to say, the risk of war. If you, in these colonised states, they see the colonisers own up to the consequences of what happened, apologise for what happened, and acknowledge the ills that were begotten upon them, acknowledge what it meant to strip Koreans of the right to speak their own language in their own country, to import Shinto Buddhism, what it meant to work the entire population as slaves from the Congo, what it meant to put the white man at the apex of Indian society, then you start to be able to mend those relations. And in the West, you can do what you do in Germany, which is you can depoliticise the narrative surrounding what is unambiguously a wrong. No longer is there grounds for the extreme far right or elements of polity to try and claim rank nationalistic points by currying favour over the crimes they deny ever having been committed. What that allows you to do is allows the country to get over the issue of was it just or was it wrong, and start getting over the question of what to do about it. Because instead of going, we have problems in this country now, besides, we're not sure if we're ill or not, Portugal, Belgium, United Kingdom, Japan can now accept what they did were wrong, are forced to accept that what they did were wrong, and now start thinking about how to make it right as they should. When you wrong someone, when you killed someone, you deserve to do recompense, not deny that was ever a crime I am proud to propose.